It started with a scream, a long, high-pitched, soul-wrenching wail that shot through the early morning air like a siren. I bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, convinced that something catastrophic had happened, a robbery, a fire, a wild animal attack. But no. It was just Karen. Again. I staggered to the window and pushed the blinds aside. There she was, flailing around my backyard in her ridiculous floral robe, screeching at the top of her lungs. My garden, my pride and joy, was now a war zone of flattened flowers, snapped tomato vines, and crushed herbs. And at the center of it all stood Karen, holding one of my prized zucchinis like a murder weapon, her face twisted in a mask of righteous indignation. "You!" she shrieked, jabbing the vegetable in my direction. "How dare you put these plants in my way?" It took me a second to process the absurdity of her words. I ran a hand down my face, already exhausted. "Karen, it's my garden. In my yard." She stomped her foot. "And my shortcut. You can't just put obstacles in my shortcut." There it was. The same ridiculous argument she had been making for weeks. Karen had appointed herself queen of the neighborhood, and had decided that my backyard was a public access route to the street behind our houses. I had asked her nicely. I had even put up a polite sign. None of it worked. Karen kept trampling my garden, and now, standing amid the ruins, she had the audacity to be angry at me. "You need to move your plants," she declared, as if she were the ruler of my land. "This is an inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" My voice cracked. "Karen, you killed my basil." She rolled her eyes. "It's just plants." I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. I was not going to lose my cool over this. I was not going to become the crazy neighbor yelling about vegetation. But Karen pushed every button I had. "Karen, you have an actual sidewalk in front of your house," I said, my patience hanging by a thread. "That adds 3 extra minutes to my walk," she said, hands on her hips. "I don't have time for that." I stared at her. "You're retired." She gasped like I had just insulted her ancestors. "And? That doesn't mean I have time to waste." It was at that moment I knew. Logic would never work with Karen. This was not a battle of reason. This was war. The first battle was waged through the Homeowners Association. I filed a complaint, detailing her repeated trespassing and destruction of my property. But Karen, being the meddling, manipulative menace she was, had connections. She had been part of the HOA board for years, and her influence ran deep. A week later, I received a notice, not against Karen, but against me. The letter accused me of aggressive behavior toward a fellow resident. Aggressive behavior? For asking someone not to kill my plants? I was livid. I stormed over to the HOA office, only to find Karen already there, playing the victim. "He's been so hostile," she said, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue for dramatic effect. "I just want to live in peace, but he keeps harassing me." The HOA leader, a man who looked like he had given up on life somewhere in the 90s, sighed. "Sir, you need to be more neighborly." "Neighborly?" I nearly choked. "She's trespassing." Now, he said, waving a hand. "It's just a garden. No need to escalate things." I wanted to scream. Karen smiled sweetly, like a cat who had just knocked a glass off a table. That night, as I surveyed the damage in my garden, I realized something. I had been playing by the rules. I had been polite. But Karen? Karen had no rules. If I wanted to win, I had to think like her. The final straw came when I caught her red-handed, again. It was early morning, and I had set up a motion sensor camera after the HOA fiasco. I replayed the footage, and there she was, casually strolling through my yard, stomping on my marigolds like they were nothing. She even paused to pick a few tomatoes, stuffing them into her oversized purse. That was it. I had tried diplomacy. I had tried the law. It was time for a more creative solution. I spent the next week meticulously planning, researching. I visited a local gardening center, where I picked up a few unsuspecting plants. Poison ivy. A lot of it. Now, planting poison ivy in your own yard isn't illegal. As long as it's on your property, it's just another plant. A very, very itchy plant. I carefully arranged the poison ivy along Karen's favorite shortcut, blending it seamlessly with the surrounding greenery. To the untrained eye, it looked just like another harmless bush. But to anyone foolish enough to trample through it well, they were in for a nasty surprise. The night before I finished my masterpiece, I stood in my yard, admiring my work. I wasn't proud of what I was doing. Okay, maybe I was. Just a little. The next morning, I was woken not by my alarm, but by the sound of pure, unfiltered agony. Ahaf! I shot out of bed, barely containing my glee as I rushed to the window. Karen was in my yard again, but this time, she wasn't stomping. She was scratching. Furiously. Her arms and legs were covered in angry red rashes, and she was clawing at her skin like a woman possessed. She stumbled back, tripping over a garden hose and landing flat on her butt. "What did you do?" she screamed, her face a mix of rage and panic. I stepped onto my porch, feigning concern. "Karen? You don't look so good." She pointed a shaking finger at me. You put something in my shortcut." "My yard," I corrected. "And what do you mean? Those are just some native plants. I thought you didn't care about plants." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, her brain short-circuiting from both rage and what I hoped was an ungodly amount of itching. I'm calling the HOA. "And the police!" she shrieked, scratching at her arms. I crossed my arms. "On what grounds?" "For walking through my private property." Her eyes bulged. She had no argument, no defense, just pure, seething anger and a whole lot of discomfort. As she stormed off, still scratching like a madwoman, I let out a long, satisfied sigh. Karen had spent months destroying my garden. Now, my garden had finally fought back. And this? This was only the beginning. Karen's screams still echoed in my ears long after she had stormed back to her house, clawing at her skin like a cat caught in a wool sweater. I sat on my porch with my coffee, watching as she paced in her backyard, ranting furiously into her phone. From my comfortable seat, I could hear snippets of her shrieking through the air, words like lawsuit, criminal, and emergency extermination punctuating her tirade. I sipped my coffee, savoring the victory. The garden had finally struck back, and it had struck hard. Later that afternoon, a pest control van pulled up in front of Karen's house. I nearly choked on my drink when I saw her emerge, still covered in blotchy red rashes, scratching at her arms like she had fire ants under her skin. She marched up to the uniformed man who stepped out of the van, her hands waving frantically as she gestured toward my yard. The poor guy barely had time to adjust his cap before she started barking orders. "There are dangerous plants all over that yard," she declared, pointing a trembling finger at my garden. "They're toxic, illegal, and they have to be removed immediately." The pest control guy, looking every bit like someone who was getting paid way too little for this nonsense, walked over and took a good look at my plant. He crouched down, examined the leaves, and then turned back to Karen with an unimpressed expression. "Ma'am, this is just poison ivy." Karen's face contorted like she had just been told the world was ending. "Just poison ivy? Just? Do you have any idea what I've been through?" She pulled up her sleeve, shoving a welt-covered arm in his face. "This is criminal activity. He planted this on purpose to attack me." The guy scratched the back of his neck, clearly trying to figure out how to escape this conversation. "Well, ma'am, poison ivy is a native plant. And this is his yard. He's allowed to grow whatever he wants on his property." Karen's mouth flapped open and closed like a dying fish. "So you're telling me I just have to live with this? With a dangerous, man-made death trap right next door?" He shrugged. "I mean, yeah. Unless you stop walking through his yard." I could have kissed that man. Karen let out an indignant gasp, spun on her heel, and stomped toward my porch, her face redder than her rashes. I barely had time to put down my coffee before she was jabbing a finger in my direction. "You think this is funny?" she snarled. I considered my options. Lying? No fun. Pretending to be remorseful? Also no fun. So instead, I leaned back in my chair, stretched my arms behind my head, and smirked. A little. Her eyes burned with fury. "You are going to remove every last one of those disgusting plants, or so help me, I will take legal action." I raised an eyebrow. Legal action for what? Landscaping my own yard. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut, grinding her teeth so hard I thought they might turn to dust. "This isn't over," she hissed before storming off, her scratching intensifying with every angry step. I knew she wouldn't stop there. Karen was the type of person who didn't take defeat lightly, even when it was her own fault. She had lost the battle, but I could already see the gears in her head turning, trying to figure out how to win the war. The next few days were eerily quiet, almost too quiet. No screaming, no stomping through my garden, no dramatic gasps of horror from my yard. But I knew Karen well enough to know that silence from her was more dangerous than noise. The first sign that she was planning something came 3 days later when I spotted her peeking over the fence, watching me like a hawk. The second sign was the clipboard in her hand. I groaned internally. Karen loved rules when they worked in her favor, and now she was clearly on a mission to find some obscure law that would force me to remove the poison ivy. I caught her eye, raised my coffee cup in a mock toast, and watched as her nostrils flared. She scribbled something aggressively on her clipboard and disappeared. That evening, I found out exactly what she had been plotting when a knock at my door interrupted my peaceful night of watching television. I opened the door to find a man in an ill-fitting suit holding a folder stuffed with paperwork. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and launched into his script. "Sir, I'm here on behalf of the Homeowners Association to inform you that a complaint has been filed regarding hazardous plant life on your property." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Let me guess. Karen." The man hesitated. We can't disclose that information." I let out a dry laugh. "Right. So what exactly is the complaint?" He flipped through his papers. "The plants in question have been described as a public safety hazard." I crossed my arms. "They're in my yard." "Yes, but they are creating an unsafe environment for—" He paused, as if realizing how stupid he sounded. "For, people who might accidentally come into contact with them." I stared at him. He stared back. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I sighed. "Let me get this straight. The Homeowners Association is telling me that plants in my private yard are unsafe, but only for someone who is trespassing." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Well, I didn't let him finish. You know what? Let's cut to the chase. There is no rule against poison ivy." I checked. "I'm not breaking any laws. So unless you can prove otherwise, I'd like you to kindly take that paperwork, walk back to your car, and tell Karen that she's going to have to find a new shortcut." His face turned a shade of pink that made me think he wasn't used to people pushing back. He shuffled through his papers one last time before letting out a defeated sigh. "I'll inform the complainant." "You do that," I said, giving him a cheerful wave as he turned and walked away. That night, I expected Karen to come banging on my door, screaming about unfairness and injustice, but no such chaos arrived. Instead, I heard her muttering angrily from her porch, probably plotting her next move. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The next morning, I woke up to another sound that sent a rush of satisfaction through me, Karen's voice, once again, wailing in misery. I stepped onto my porch just in time to see her sitting on her front steps, covered in even more poison ivy rashes than before. Apparently, she had been so determined to inspect my yard that she had accidentally brushed up against more of the plant. She locked eyes with me, and for the first time, there was something other than rage on her face. There was defeat. I gave her a friendly nod. "Morning, Karen. You should really watch where you step." She let out a groan and buried her face in her hands. I smiled. My garden had defended itself well. But I had a feeling Karen wasn't quite done yet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Karen was quiet. No shouting. No accusations. No stomping through my yard like a deranged wildebeest. Just silence. It should have been a victory, but I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat graciously. No, she was the type to go underground, regroup, and come back swinging. And I had a sinking feeling that her silence was the calm before the storm. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she had planned. It happened on a bright Saturday morning. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting to bask in the glory of my peaceful garden. Instead, I was greeted by a nightmare. My yard, my beautiful, carefully cultivated garden, had been destroyed. Completely wiped out. The flower beds had been ripped apart, my vegetable plants uprooted and tossed carelessly across the lawn, the bushes hacked down to ugly, lifeless stump. My once thriving sanctuary was now nothing but a wasteland of broken stems and scattered dirt. At first, I thought it was some kind of freak accident. Maybe a wild animal had gone on a rampage. But then I saw the real culprit. A team of landscapers stood near the wreckage, packing up their equipment like they had just finished a routine job. And standing at the center of it all, arms crossed, looking ridiculously smug, was Karen. I barely registered the coffee cup slipping from my hand and shattering on the porch. I stormed down the steps, my pulse pounding in my ears. "What the hell did you do?" Karen turned to face me with an infuriatingly satisfied smile. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I did you a favor." "A favor?" My voice cracked. "You destroyed my entire garden." She waved a hand dismissively. "I had it removed. It was a public nuisance." I stared at her, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity. A nuisance? In what world was my garden a nuisance? Her smile widened, and that was when I knew she had been waiting for this moment, had been savoring it. "Oh, I had the HOA approve it. Turns out, if something is deemed hazardous to the neighborhood, it can be forcibly removed. And after all the complaints I filed, they finally saw reason." The smugness in her voice made me want to scream. She had gone behind my back, used the same HOA that had ignored my complaints, and twisted the rules in her favor. She had played dirty, and she had won. For the first time since this ridiculous war started, I felt real, unfiltered rage rise inside me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think clearly. Karen thrived on emotional reactions. She wanted me to snap, to lose control so she could play the victim again. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I took a slow step forward, lowering my voice. "You hired landscapers to rip apart my yard. Without my permission." Her grin faltered just a little. "Well, yes. But it was necessary." I nodded, processing. "And you paid for all of this, right? Since it was your idea." She lifted her chin. "Of course." That was all I needed to hear. I turned on my heel and walked straight back into my house, ignoring her shouts as she tried to bait me into another argument. I had no interest in wasting another second arguing with her. I had something better. I had proof. I pulled up the security footage from my cameras, rewinding to earlier that morning. There it was, in crystal clear detail. Karen standing in my yard, directing the landscapers as they tore apart my property. There was no contract, no legal notice, nothing. Just her, committing blatant, undeniable trespassing and vandalism. And I was going to use every second of that footage to make sure she paid. The first thing I did was contact the HOA. I sent them the footage along with a formal complaint, pointing out the glaring hypocrisy of them allowing Karen to destroy my yard while they had done nothing when she was the one causing problems. Their response was instant and panic. Apparently, even they hadn't expected Karen to go this far. The thought of legal repercussions must have scared them, because they backpedaled fast, issuing a formal apology and immediately reversing their decision. Karen was ordered to pay for all damages, plus a hefty fine for unauthorized property destruction. But that wasn't even the best part. I didn't just stop at the HOA. I sent the footage to my lawyer, who confirmed that I had a solid case for property damage and trespassing. Then, just to twist the knife a little deeper, I leaked the video to the neighborhood group chat. Within hours, the entire community was talking about it. Karen had spent years building her image as the perfect neighbor, the unofficial queen of the HOA. Now, she was the villain, the woman who had illegally destroyed someone else's yard out of pure spite. By the next morning, Karen's front yard was covered in angry notes from neighbors who had finally had enough of her antic. The HOA fined her. She had to pay for my damages. Her reputation was in ruins. But my favorite part? The sheer humiliation on her face when she had to hand over a check for the damages she had caused. She tried to salvage some dignity, holding her head high as she shoved the check into my hands. "You may have won this round, but this isn't over." I smirked. "Oh, Karen. It's over. And you lost." She stormed off without another word, slamming her front door so hard that her decorative wreath fell off. I pocketed the check, savoring the sweet, satisfying taste of victory. With the money I got from the settlement, I didn't just rebuild my garden. I made it better. I put up a brand new, reinforced fence, taller and stronger than before, making sure there was no possible way Karen would ever take another shortcut through my property again. I planted even more flowers, more vegetables, more greenery. And just to make sure Karen never forgot who won, I placed a tiny, discreet sign near the fence. "Caution, poison ivy nearby." Karen never set foot in my yard again. And as I sat on my porch, drinking my coffee and watching my new garden thrive, I realized something. I had spent so much time trying to fight her, to reason with her, to stop her from ruining the things I love. But in the end, she had been her own worst enemy. I didn't need to fight her anymore. She had already lost. The war was over. The garden had won. And for the first time in a long time, I had peace.